Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you have questions, we've got answers. We've got a great audio panel here. We've got lots of audio questions. This is the audio day. So throw those questions in, especially if you've got audio questions. Throw those in today. We've got a great group to answer those questions for you. If you're in Makana, of course, you can ask those questions in there. You can chat about them. You can vote on them. You can do all those things. If you're not, don't worry. You can use this QR code here. This is askofficehours.global. That's askofficehours.global. 24/7, you can throw questions in, and then we'll feed them in either the same day or the next day. Just make sure that it's one question at a time and that it really relates to media. So those are the things that are useful there. Let's go ahead and jump into those questions. Bill, what do we have?
First one comes this morning from Andy Kokendorfer in Vieira, Florida. And Eddie says, what settings do you check to prepare for a Zoom meeting for broadcast? Turn off entry chime, change recording parameters, and add alternate tools, add alternate hosts, those kind of things.
Go ahead, Jeff.
So I have a new one that we just discovered in mic checks this morning that I'm going to throw out there that I'm going to check from now on. And that is if you look in the audio settings, you see there is a check your mic level and automatically adjust mic level. Now, if you're coming in with a USB interface, that will be disabled because it comes in as digital. Unfortunately, it was still functioning on mine and didn't have the ability to turn it off. So I was changing my mic preamp gain, which is an external mic preamp feeding in through the ATEM Mini Pro, and I could change that gain 20 or 30 dB, and Zoom would automatically adjust me back up to sort of around -20. I had to switch to an analog input, so I switched to the mic built into my Mac that has control, and that switch popped back on, and I could disable it and then go back to black magic. So that's a big caveat for everyone to watch out for.
Good, Mickey.
Yeah, if you're talking about the meeting wherein you are broadcasting to a room where the audience is watching, not a meeting where you're playing in like Zoom ISO feeds. First off, make sure if you have a 1080p capable account, make sure that 1080 is enabled on that account. On the machine that is broadcasting the video feed out, make sure that you have original sound for musicians enabled, high fidelity music mode, and stereo audio. I assume you're mixing an actual on a console that's putting out a stereo mix. So yes, check stereo audio. Make sure that the camera feed within the video settings of Zoom is set to HD. And then also disable the ability for participants to unmute themselves, both audio and video-wise. If you are just broadcasting out and don't have interaction with the audience, I would recommend taking a look at using a webinar instead of a standard meeting. That will allow you to more easily manage the participants.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Michael Anderson in Jackson, Wyoming. And Michael says, recommendations for a quiet 16-port Dante dedicated Ethernet switch. He's creating an on-the-road talk show that's live streaming on Zoom. There's a local host and a control room with remote guests using Zoom and maybe Zoom ISO.
Good, Jeff.
I'm assuming you're talking about fan noise quiet. I'm just going to assume that. When it comes to Dante workflows, I'm straight up, I just buy the Netgear M4250 production switches, and that's it. They do have some that are fanless. They're smaller, though. You're not going to get them at 16 port count. But, of course, you could lag or you could uplink two of those together if you needed to. I've got a slew, probably 20 of the little 8-port ones or 10 ports, whatever they are, that are completely silent, no fan noise whatsoever. Though their larger ones have two modes. So if they have a fan in them, you could actually turn it into quiet mode, and the fans barely run. As long as your temperatures are within range, I can say that you don't want to use it in quiet mode whenever it's locked in a Pelican box that's weatherproofing it out in the field with about 110 degrees worth of sunlight coming at it. Ask me how I know. You need to have it on the cool function at that point.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the Cisco CBS 350 line. They have a lot of models, a good number of models here, and some of them are fanless. So if you take a look at their their models. They have models that are fanless and that go, I believe, up to 24 ports fanless. Probably for sure 16, but probably up to 24. What I use myself on set for my Dante network on film sets is this model, which has 6 gigabit ports and two 2.5 gig ports and two 10 gig ports on both RJ45 and SFP plus, which is nice. But yeah, another option is the Netgear 4250. If you're in the configuration setting for it, there is a fan mode that is off on some models. Although I would recommend to. It's always best to keep your hardware well cooled. So I would recommend just isolating out your hardware into a separate machine room so that you don't have to think about the fan noise, and you can just keep everything running at full fan speed.
Go, Jeff.
Two other things to think about with these switches. The ones that Mickey and Jeff already showed are managed switches, and you need that for Dante so that you can turn off any settings that deal with energy efficient Ethernet. And the other thing I would ask yourself is, do you need PoE? There's a lot of Dante devices that will run off of PoE, and that can be very convenient. So do you need power over Ethernet?
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Paul Wallace in Hot Springs, Arkansas. And the question is, Apple's next iPad event. Apple has set a virtual Let Loose event for May 7th, which is expected to focus on the iPad and Apple Pencil. Other rumored upgrades include an updated version of the Pro's Magic Keyboard case. Discuss.
Good, Bill.
Yeah, the pencil thing, if you can see the graphic for it, comes from the fact that it's a large hand holding a pencil. So I think that's a pretty safe bet that they're going to be talking about iPad and Apple Pencil. I will say that I'm hoping for a little closer integration. I use an Apple iPad Pro and an Apple Pencil almost every day for script markup in my audiobook stuff. And it's a little kludgy only because I'm working in iOS when I'm doing my markup. Then I want to get the script over onto my regular Mac OS system. It functions, and it functions actually pretty well, but it's kind of only monodirectional now. I have to do markup on the pad. I can sync that up into iCloud on the current document, and then when I open that on my laptop computer here on my desk with the vertical screen for reading the script, all that annotation comes through, but I can't work back and forth fluidly and seamlessly. So I think there's still a bit of a conflict between the capabilities of iOS and Mac OS that isn't completely resolved, and I'd love to see eventually them make that a little more seamlessly round-trippable. It may be harder than I think because I don't really know the differences between iOS and macOS, but that's what I would hope for, and we'll see what they come up with. Great tools.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that of course we do with what I do with the Wacom tablet is to use it as a telestrator, and I think that a tighter integration between the iPad and the Mac OS could be something that'd be really interesting. Is where it really becomes kind of a external. You can do that now, but only in certain environments, and so it could be a lot easier. I think there's a lot more control that you get with a Wacom tablet that if Apple added, I think it'd be problematic for Wacom because of the iPad, at that price point would actually be pretty competitive. And so there's a lot of things like you can do things like airbrush with a Wacom tablet, with the Cintiq line, not with the one that I use. But where the tip is not actually touching, and you're able to actually control flow with the buttons. And so those are things that I think that Apple could go a lot further along to really make this more of an artist tool. And I think that would be it'd be an interesting puzzle for Apple to kind of get into. But obviously it's hard to know, but we'll know soon enough. Go ahead, Jeff.
Here's something I'd love to see. On Apple, you can have this design idea for free or maybe for some shares of stock. An Apple Pencil that works with the MacBook Pro trackpad so that your pencil can draw right there on the trackpad.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if it got that far. I mean, I do think that there are places where the trackpad, to your point, would be perfect to just be able to sign things, to be able to annotate things, to be able to those kinds of things, being able to use that pencil in a lot of places and on a phone. I mean, a lot of times you're sitting there with your finger going, I can't believe I'm doing this. Like, why don't I know, Samsung has had that for a long time, but we don't have it on our side. Next question.
Mike Edwards in Brooklyn, New York is up next. Mike says, morning, everyone. What's the panel's take on the Steinberg VST Live Pro for production? If not, what applications would you lean into in its place?
Good morning.
There are a number of applications out there that are used by musicians on stage for live shows, such as Ableton Live and even Studio One has a live show mode. But this one seems to be more of a show control application because it includes things like a sequencer and virtual instruments, lighting and synchronization, song text and video. So it's quite affordable. I think it looks like $100 for a permanent license. I haven't used these things personally, so I can't tell you whether it's stable or not, how stable it might be, but it's a real interesting application to look into.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, specifically in terms of the audio processing side of the application, I'm not a big fan of live audio processing for live happening within general purpose CPUs and also on software. There's a much higher latency on them compared to, say, DSP chips, and also there is the possibility of a crash there. I would much prefer, like, if you do want to use a software tool to do processing or a software-based tool to do processing, I would prefer one that runs the actual audio processing itself on the dedicated DSP cards or FPGAs in it.
Good, Jeff.
Well, times are changing, though, Mickey. The CPU DSP is upon us. I think that there's some validity in this product. I feel like it's a little bit too good to be true, though. In my opinion, I would rather go with central control or central control. If I don't have the budget for that, then Companion, which is free. And then when it comes to the plug-in nature of it, that's the part that worries me. Is I don't know, VST's plugins are a hit and miss sometimes for me. So I just would prefer to have the control, something that's doing automation and show control. I would prefer it to be standalone. So another app, if you're locked to the Mac world, would be QLab. Without a doubt, a very powerful piece of software that can do somewhat of show control.
Next question.
Mark Steele in Orlando, Florida is up next. He says it appears interest in Vision Pro has been falling dramatically recently. Too expensive, too heavy, lack of killer apps, very little compelling immersive content, and so forth. Was this rushed to market too soon? And he has a link to a story there.
Go, Courtney.
No, I think they spent a whole lot of time researching, developing, and tuning it to be the best it could possibly be for its particular product. So I don't think it was rushed to market. I think the problem is the market for all types of immersive or augmented reality headsets is very small and have very few applications, as Microsoft learned 5-6 years ago when they introduced the HoloLens. They still haven't developed, they've even had huge contracts with the military for some types of applications, and the military finally discovered that, we can kind of do better with just our own eyesight and somebody going, look over there, as opposed to specific products trying to come up with specific solutions that augmented reality can solve. And there's not that many compelling applications. There are a few, but those are all very small markets. And so I think they're just discovering that. And of course, when they released Vision Pro, Apple, of course, being rumored for so long and finally being released, it's all the YouTube influencers, all the fanboys had to have the first one on their blog. So there's going to be a huge sales out of the gate there. For everybody who wants to be the first one to post the YouTube of the Vision Pro and their analysis and their reviews, and then it drops back to the normal market for augmented reality headsets, which is fairly small.
Go, Bill.
Yeah, I'm still seeing a lot in the medical space, and I note this because one of our big biomedical firms here in Southern California ordered a bunch first, so I've been kind of tracking that story, and I'm seeing things ping from around the world now where surgeons are using this as an augmented, give me the display of not just X-rays and the scans and things, but additional information and additional communications for research as a surgeon does actual surgery. They're talking about this all over the world. In fact, I saw a story out of India where they were doing arthroscopic surgery on someone's knee using Vision Pro as their surgical assist. Obviously, there's a lot of work to be done, and a lot of vetting, and a lot of insurance implementations. The medical field is very slow to change, but that kind of thing in a variety of different things, I mean, airplane stress testing and X-rays to be able to bring those up. There's just a lot of things where I think this could turn out to be seminal research that Apple has done with a very high resolution in front of your eyes display, and then rolling out across places where that's important. Not everything, and I don't think it's ever going to be the living room TV replacement for vast swaths of the world because it is expensive. But I think as a tool set, it's really fascinating to watch.
I still think it's just a big beta test. So we were all, people were engaged into buying into it and being able to play with it. I do find it funny that analysts said, Apple, the first information was Apple couldn't sell more than 400,000 in a year, even if they wanted to, because they can't make the displays any faster. And then in the last news, they were like, well, Apple was expecting to sell 800,000, even though we know that they can't make more than 400,000. So they said, well, they're going to go back down to 400,000. Okay, they're going back to where they were when they started. We have to remember that all this information is not coming from Apple. It's coming from people on the outside making guesses. So I don't know if Apple's that worried about it yet. The thing is this has never been seen as the final, what they're really trying to produce. This is them getting out there and trying to figure it out. And of course, you're not going to have great content until people get a hold of it. I think there's we can see the seeds of things that could be very good. I think that where Apple could really make the mistake is not seeding content. So they've done a little bit of drips and drabs here and there. But this could have the same problem that books had. So the iBooks had the problem that Apple went to traditional content producers who made traditional content that was not very good. And then no one really moved to a new kind of format there because there wasn't enough money in it to do it. It was hard to lift. It was hard to figure out. So in 2008, 9, 10, Apple could have redefined what a book is. And instead, they tried to just compete with Amazon. And that really became, that they were competing on a hill that they couldn't take. And so I think that's a place that they could be. I think one thing that's interesting is it did push Meta to extend out where their the headsets are going. So now they're licensing them to other people. Now that may seem like a great way to expand, but that's exactly what Google did with Android, and that didn't turn out too well. so the the fragmentation will make it almost impossible to develop. So unless Meta can hang on to the control of how that processor goes and can make sure that compatibility goes across all of the different builds, they'll have the same fragmentation problems that Google has. Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I think, like you said, there's very few products out there for it, and the problem with writing software for a consumer-based, and you're thinking of writing software for a consumer-based display platform, and if it's that narrow a market, if that's so expensive to buy in and there's so little available, it's going to have an incredible chicken and egg problem. Not that it's so expensive, a lot of people, and because there's not a lot of stuff available for it, people won't buy it because it's not selling large numbers. People won't develop for it because it takes even more time to develop a game or an application that works in that proprietary environment than it does just to work across the board on Mac or PC or Android or iOS. So they're not going to develop, they're not going to put the resources into developing a killer product for that narrow a market. It's going to have that chicken and egg problem.
It'll be interesting. The talking to some developers, their conversion from demo to paid version, because so many people have spent so much money on this, their conversion from demo to paid is between 5 and 10 times higher than normally for iOS. So they definitely have seen, because people have already spent money on it, they're more likely to buy things. And so, and the numbers are, if you build something, there are definitely apps out there that people are willing to pay for. And I've talked to some developers that basically paid off all of their development in the first week of release. So they're not, and they're complicated apps, and so it just depends on what you're right that as a general app, you're not going to be able to do a general thing. But if you're taking really advantage of the process, I think there's some opportunities. What we're seeing a lot right now is what you always see, a bunch of people throwing things against the wall, most of it not sticking. But if you look at JigSpace, like if JigSpace can figure out a way to make their product more addressable from a cost perspective, they would blow up, because it's really like that's the next what you want everything to show up from a Kia with. So those are the kind of things that I think that are still possible. So we'll see. I have a feeling that we'll see a lot more between now and the end of June. So we should probably return to this conversation after WWDC. Next question.
Leo Mendel in London is up next. What's the best cloud-based photo storage? Something that works with Android PC and needs to auto-sync. Advanced features that would be welcome are face recognition and picture editing.
Go ahead, Courtney.
I use Google Photos, and I'm very happy with it. It works on Android, and it works on a lot of things. Works on Mac platform as well, iOS as well. It synchronizes every time you take a picture in your phone. It automatically loads it to the cloud, and then it's available on all your PCs through the Google Photos app on the PC, and it has all kinds of organizational things. It does a lot of stuff. I just opened my Google Photos and went, oh, I didn't know it did that. Oh, I didn't know it did that. It does organizations like, here's the highlights from 2014. And it has tools that you can just click on a thing and it'll build a highlight video, and you choose what you want to, these people should be in the highlight video, or this period of time, or you can set up a lot of parameters, and it'll build a little video with an audio soundtrack for you. It does animation. It does the newer Google Pixel phones. Photos supports removing AI, removal of objects, moving objects in the frame. So I think it's pretty competent, and it's free. So that's another good thing.
Good guy.
Yeah. Besides Google Photos, which I use as well as another route, Synology Photos. So go ahead and buy yourself your own cloud, be your own cloud, and then you could sync to other clouds like Dropbox and Google, so you have your photos in another place. But now it's super fast, and if you want segmentation between users on your network, you can have each user with their own photos. Then it becomes really fast too, because it's stored locally and you know that you have them. It's the thing that you grab in case of fire. You have all your photos. So it's pretty slick. I got the idea from Felipe Bays, who hosts on a Synology, and I had never seen the app until he started showing me. He has this really fancy, like $6,000 Sony camera, and he started showing me all the stuff that it did. And I didn't even know that it did the facial recognition and all that. So pretty robust. So you just buy a Synology, install the Synology Photos app, and now you're your own cloud.
Next question.
Sean Johnson in New York is up next. Traditional audio mixers have monitor or control room left and right outs. The Behringer XR18 does not seem to have these. Do users generally use a pair of the regular outputs for this and configure accordingly? Thanks.
Good morning.
So the XR18 has a main left-right output. It has 6 buses that can be paired, and so for 3 stereo pairs. And it has a headphone output. And I would just dismiss conventional thought about how to use them, and use them as they fit your application. So here at my desktop, for example, I'm using the main left-right output for my speakers. I'm using the headphones for my ear monitors. And then the 6 buses in various combinations to go to software for Zoom or for any other applications, and that works. In a live situation, I might use the main left-right outputs for the main speakers, and then buses for recording and such. It does have the multi-channel USB port on it, so you can multi-track off of that or go into a computer for teleconferencing and use buses for that. There are a number of ways to use it. Find a way that fits for you.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, so Marty's got the XR18 close to him, which allows him to use the headphone output. Usually in a live situation, basically the mixer is the audio mixer person is away from the physical mixer because it's an iPad control only. The monitor section is where you get the cue function, where you can solo individual channels. And if I share the screen of this, you'll see this is the software for the XR18. If we go to the in-out routing and we look at the outputs, the problem is that cue can only go to either the main XLR or the phone outputs. So if you're going to use the main XLR outputs as your monitor section to get your headphone cues, you're going to have to route your main outputs through one of the other XLR outputs. So it doesn't give you a lot of functionality for that. You have it, but you kind of have to work around. You're taking your main, what is normally going to be your stereo that goes out to your audience, and you're taking that for your monitor send.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, exactly what Jeff mentioned. And just because I don't think the in-out window popped up when you opened that, Jeff. I'm just going to quickly show it again here. If you go in the in-out window of the XR Edit, on the main out, you can send the monitor bus to the actual main left and right XLR outputs. But of course, you would still need to be able to hear or send the mix out to speakers. So you would send your main left and right here to one of your 6 other auxes. You can assign that there.
Yeah, it's interesting that they limited the monitor bus to only go to a few of the outputs, not any of the outputs.
That's interesting. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Guy Cochran in Seattle. We're witnessing a Cochran in action. What would you recommend to use for run of show?
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, well, yesterday we did a little bit of a kind of a roundtable as to what instruments that we use for run of show, and it reminded me to plug Talaluk's wife's excellent book called The Beginner's Guide to Opera Stage Management, because it has a whole great section on rundowns and cueing, and it gets you back to basics. But I'm going to let Jeff jump over and talk about some of that. So let me back up. The reason why I asked this question is because we're in a transition phase going from Google to Rundown Studio. And so I'm having a hard time getting over there because I'm just so used to Google Sheets and the way that we laid this show out. And so wrapping your mind around pacing, the difference between starting a timer and having hard numbers to hit, it's just a different mindset. So I'll let Jeff jump over because we had an hour-long discussion yesterday.
Yeah, that really was a good discussion, wasn't it? So my 9 list, I couldn't get a top 10. I tried, but I couldn't. But it was Google Sheets. Number 1 is probably the most used, at least in our corporate environment, in our corporate meetings that we're seeing. It's readily available. Central Control has a rundown module, which I've used in great success, but it's a little simpler right now. ShowFlow's the big elephant in the room, man. They've been around for a long time, but they're pricey. Cues by Tinkerlist is a new one that's coming up pretty fast. They are really more so not just in rundown, but also automation, which they can control your switcher, they can control graphics, they can do a lot more than just a run a show. And that's what I was looking for. I ran across Stage Timer, of course, which is Lucas Herman and his partner John Barker on Rundown Studio. So Stage Timer evolved. I think we had them on Office Hours one time before into Rundown Studio. Times, yeah. And it's really powerful, but I found I was still wanting more. I've been using a open source one called OnTime, and it's really got a lot of the feature set. OnTime, it's getontime.no. And then Rundown Creator, it's been around for a long time, more like a news station type of run, and not really show run. So it depends on your needs. And then the last one was QPilot, which is awesome, but really, really, really pricey. But it's really more about music environments, music videos, concerts. You can put a track in, time your camera cuts, tell your cameras where to go. I mean, it's crazy good, but really expensive. So it just kind of depends on what you're looking for on the rundown side. But we kind of broke it down to where all the good stuff is there, but there's no perfect one yet. We're still looking for that.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say that all of the rundown software right now is competing for 10% of the market because 90% of the market is Google Sheets. Like it is like generally, and it's hard because you go in. The challenge is that you really have to kind of own the whole process, because if I go into a show and I show them someone anything other than Google Sheets, there's a whole lot of what are we doing here? Like what are we? Why are we? Because you're dealing with multiple. It's kind of a lowest common denominator problem, because you have multiple teams coming in from multiple locations, and and if they don't know how to use the product, it's very hard to get them to use it properly or even want to use it at all. And so that becomes the real challenge. And I think that's why we all end up kind of back. We keep on going out, and I've looked at Rundown Studio. I just haven't needed it to use it for the kind of shows that I'm doing. I've used ShowFlow, Rundown Creator, and all of those are great. But if you don't find a team that can really learn them and use them, so I think they lean towards internal teams. Internal corporate teams tend to take on the software because they're all doing it and they have full control over the entire team working with it. And I do think that they produce a better result than Google Sheets. The challenge is when you have disparate teams who have all used their own little things and Google Sheets, the lowest common denominator between all of them becomes Google Sheets, and that's the hard part to kind of unwind. Next question.
Next one comes to us from David Brady in New York, and David says, using Companion, is it possible to trigger actions based on input from an ATEM switcher, such as cut to a camera, it's the switcher, and fire off OSC commands and so forth? The environment is not looking to incorporate stream decks, but looking for some automation.
Mickey?
Yeah, yes, you can do that. You can get feedback from the ATEM using modules from ATEM OSC and also Mix Effect.
Yeah, and I think it is a little bit more challenging because you have to pull the state, because it's not overtly putting it out. So you have to pull the state of what state changes are happening there. So a little bit more complicated. I know Adam has been working on that for Mix Effect, and there are some of the information. I don't think you get the full information from what the switcher is doing. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Duncan in Melbourne, Australia. And Duncan wonders, question for Jeff Keithley. Apart from what Lavo are currently doing with Cloud MX from Waves, have you come across any other online audio mix solutions that are on the lower end budget option?
Go ahead, Jeff.
Probably the free ones would be Harrison Mixbus. It's not free.
It's not very
relatively inexpensive, though.
Inexpensive,
$79, whatever, and you can get it on different sales and stuff. Then the other would be the one that is free, Reaper, that's been used quite a bit for PC or computer based altogether, because you can run on Linux. It's one of its strong points. On what I would consider production level, on Hertz software based mixers are something that we're looking into right now. Lama, not Lavo, but Lama, Lama, has a great audio mixer and basically a virtual DSP. That is also something we're looking into, where I've been playing with the last couple of days. It's pretty powerful. And then the last one that I'm working and testing right now for cloud production is SSL's /Calrec System T. Not free, definitely not free, but it's the most capable out there because it is SSL Calrec. Yeah.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Kyle Hammond in Chicago, Illinois. Can we talk about a TD calling a show using just their voice? How would that work?
Good guy.
Well, instead of me just talking about it from the Ross keynote at NAB. So here it goes. Take it away, Bo.
Thanks, David. So I'm probably not the only person here that talks to their carbonite, but does yours listen? Here's a fun little demo for tonight. Expression out. Carbonite, show me the multi-viewer. Ready 1, black on the line. Fade up. Ready 2. Take. Ready 3. Take 3. Ready split. Build me a 2-box with 1 left, 3 right. Nope, take 1. Ready split on an effect. Do it. Ready 1. Take. Ready black. Fade to black. Ready me, take me, bring me back full screen. All right, so we're currently using a speech-to-text module that's trainable, it works on-prem, and it does not need an internet connection. And we've built out a keyword recognition engine that can be configured to trigger pretty much anything on your network. So it's certainly not perfect, but we're working on it, and I can't wait to see what the team does with it. Back to you guys.
And there's our own Bo Gordle, working on the voice. It's pretty interesting. And so they've been working on that for a little while, and it's pretty exciting. Did you have anything else to add, Guy?
Yeah, it just knocked my socks off when I first saw it. It's the future. I mean, we'll see what happens. I mean, a lot of people are upset about it, but because some people might lose their jobs. But hey, if it works, if we can get it to where it's accurate with a nice head-worn mic or something in the room, so it's not picking up extraneous sounds, and it's working perfect every single time, 100%, no chance of mistakes. And I can see for some of the shows we do that are pretty basic, it's just pets, and it can handle it.
Yeah, I think that it is. I definitely think there's a place for it, but I don't. I think that when people say, "Well, that no one's going to have a TD," there's so many things that a TD does while you're not, in the show. That's what's happening. But a lot of times they're setting things up. Now, I think that as that large language model gets more advanced and it has full control over the switcher, and you can say, I need a shot with these 6 things, or with all, keep track of all these things. And when you start getting image analyzation, there's a place where the machine can, with a human interaction, can produce a better show. And we found that over and over again, is that when you start giving it implicit control over that process, you end up with a better show. But it's still limited to what it can do there. But I think it's going to be really interesting. Yeah, go Bill.
That feels like the future. I mean, it's very, very cool. And so congratulations on everybody who's working on refining this. I will say I'm constantly referring people who do not work backstage in these things to things like that Hamish Hamilton clip on YouTube of the 50th Super Bowl. And just to give you an idea of how much organized chaos there is with a show that in the course of maybe 10 minutes or 8 minutes has thousands of different cues that are all preset and rehearsed and done beautifully by people working at the top of their game. It's just fascinating to watch this. I'm not sure that the tool, which is exactly what it is, which is the developmental process that we see is going there in the future, is ready to do something that fast-paced. I mean, Bo did a beautiful job of calling that precisely and clearly in ways that the software can understand, and it will improve and improve and improve until it does a lot of useful work, I suspect. But a human team still, I think, is the premier way to do this. Is just how it feels to me.
At the moment. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, at the moment.
It was an amazing demo, and I appreciate what they're doing for working. And for a remote setup where everybody's in different locations, it could work. I think it's not near as twitchy as the TDs I've seen working. Most of the ones I've seen, especially on cutting sports, the director's standing right next to the TD, and will go ready to, and by the first edge of coming out of his mouth, take 2, bing, the switch happens, and a lot of times they'll snap their fingers, and when the director will snap their fingers, and he wants to see that change on the snap. And I think the inherent latency of voice recognition they were pretty close there. It was about a half a second to a second for it to take effect. But for fast sports switching, it may not be fast enough.
I think that we're also looking at this as a test case. I mean, I think that if we project this 3 to 5 years out, it can be making those guesses as well as most human beings can. So I do think that there is I do think for a top level broadcast, I think you're still going to have a TD. The danger with all of the AI tools right now is not that you can't have an advanced person running them and they work great. It's how are you cutting off the supply of people who will become advanced? So one of the things a lot of industries are having problems with right now is not enough people coming in at the entry level. So with that feeder system, we'll take another industry in surveying right now. I was talking to a friend of mine. They are 600,000 people short. This is for, figuring you can't build a building without these, you can't build a highway. You can't build without surveyors. and they are 600,000 people short, and they can't figure out how to, because they're just not getting anyone to go into the feeder system. So there's a lot of people who are older making that happen, but it's not enough. It's not enough. And it's a job, by the way, that's very hard to replace with AI because you're walking around, outside. So it is. But this is where it's fine to not have any, like to not have those things. I had a conversation with a visual effects supervisor many years ago, and we were talking about rotoscoping all going overseas. And the problem is that rotoscoping is oftentimes an entry level position before you become a compositor. And he was like, well, if we get rid of all the rotoscopers, we won't have any compositors. There's kind of an ecosystem there that has to be filled. And I think that can be a danger, as we, not just with this, but with anything, is one of the real powers of being a TD, a technical director that sits at the board, is that you're listening to a director and you're learning how they work. You're learning what they're doing. You're learning how they work. You're learning how to think about these things. And then you slowly become that director. But that practice over many years is important. And if you take that away, it just gets harder. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, and then with AI, you got to think about that as well. If it's a regular rhythmic show where you're doing it all the time. So we watched Taylor Sunderhouse behind the scenes at his news station, and that stuff is just cue to cue to cue, including moving the Vinton robotic cameras. So there's no camera operator. A technical producer pushes the space bar and it moves the camera and it cuts the camera and it brings up the audio level and brings down the lav on the other on the regular reporter and over to the weather desk. It's pretty amazing to think that it's a lot of setup up front, but once these either people or the AI learns the go ahead.
Especially as like news, it's the same every day. You're in the same room, you're doing the same pattern, you're doing those things become very I know I went into a newsroom 20 years ago and it was all one person sitting there doing exactly what you're saying. I mean, those robocams are just floating around and doing what they need to do. And yeah, it's an amazing, but again, the question is what's the future of that kind of formulated content too? Like, we're finding that kind of content is not getting as much traction as it used to either. So that'll be an interesting puzzle too. Next question.
We were doing newsroom automation in 1984.
Yeah.
So that shows you how long it's been.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Matt Halverson in Brookings, South Dakota. I'm exporting a transcript out of Premiere Pro and then trying to figure out the easiest way to remove the timestamps from the text file. Is there an easy, automatic way to do that besides selecting and deleting every timestamp?
There's a couple different things. It depends on whether you're on a Mac or PC that you can do. But what you're really looking at is text manipulation. So it's not really time code related. It's looking for something that is, that's part of the text. You're looking for a pattern. And so there are a couple things. Now, if you're talking about dealing with scripts directly, Telestream makes a variety of software that on the Mac side, it was Mac Captions. I don't know if they still make it, but that will manipulate. It'll bring all that stuff in. It will read it. And you can just say, get rid of all the time code, and it'll just get rid of it all because it knows what everything is that it's looking at. Outside of that, you can use, find and replace. So look for this pattern, take it out, like that type of thing. And it doesn't have to be exactly the characters. It just says, if I see leading zeros, take out take that and the next things out. And that'll be, it'll be able to go and find and replace those very, very fast with spaces or nothing or everything else that you just have to pay attention to the formatting. So many text editors will do some version of that. Some of the more like things like BB Edit on the Mac or other things like that are more for coders might have better tools to do that, but you should be able to do that. And I would bet, now that we're talking about AI, that if you put that script into something like ChatGPT and said remove the time code, it would just do it. Like I had someone, like you could just say, just remove all the time codes and it will just take it all out. I had someone sent me an image yesterday. They were putting something up and they had a sticker they wanted to get rid of that was, in a photo and everything else. And I just circled the sticker in Photoshop and said, remove the sticker, and it gone. And it just filled it in with something that totally worked. And it took me a minute, to make that correction. And that would have been it was on glass with something behind it. I mean, it would have taken me a half an hour to carefully clone that out. And it was less than a minute for me. I mean, it took most of the time is opening and saving it was the biggest time suck, to do it. Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, like Alex said, you can run a macro in most word processors to look for certain patterns, maybe with two characters, whatever they are, and a colon, two characters and a colon, two characters and a colon. and just take out that line. It depends on how that software is exported. The software, I've written software and made available and published software for doing transcription that puts time code in to transcribe files. And usually I have it so that my software is set to, it inserts the time code and a tab character, or the time code and a carriage return. So usually it can be, the time code can either be on a separate line or with a tab after it. So you just add that to the pattern. And the likelihood of it taking something not time code out is pretty small, and just have search and replace with, write a macro that search and replaces that pattern, and they're all done.
Good, Bill.
Yeah, I used to do this a good little bit. I used FileMaker Pro of all the weird things because it had a nice little build a formula in kind of plain English, and so exactly what Courtney and everybody else is talking about. The form of time code. Anytime you get a consistent pattern, you can usually say take that and replace it with just a space, and they'll all disappear through your file pretty quickly.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from A. Barara in Flowery Branch. What's your opinion on Glyph Tech SSD hard drives? And that's one of our QR code questions.
Good, Mickey.
Yeah, Glyph has been making drives for a long time. Drives that are well loved by the media production industry. They, for their SSDs, they use SSDs from Micron. So of course it contains both NAND flash and controllers made by Micron. So very high quality SSDs inside there. So I wouldn't hesitate to invest in Micron in Glyph products.
Next question.
Jeff Francis in Columbia, South Carolina, and here on the panel, wonders about reflective paint in lieu of a projection screen. And it's for a sunny sanctuary, but primarily projection of text.
Good morning.
So I have used reflective paint successfully in rooms with controlled lighting conditions. But here's the thing. A projection surface or screen, think of it as actually part of the optical system of the projection. So a projection screen determines the reflection or viewing angles, both horizontally and vertically, how widely it disperses that light, and whether the light is actually amplified or diminished, and whether there's a hot spot in the center of the screen from certain viewing angles. Some screens are actually multi-layer optical systems with controlled reflection technology in them. So in a environment where you have a lot of ambient light, and maybe at certain times of the day you may have direct sunlight on the viewing surface, you want to use what's called an ambient light rejecting screen. These are generally dark in color, from anywhere from a dark silver to actual black, but they have technology in them that tightly controls the reflecting angles. So you can use them in actual full sunlight. In areas where you're able to control the light, the ambient lighting situation, you can use other types of screens, even a standard white screen which disperses light in all directions. And when you do that, you're reducing the amount of light that somebody's going to perceive from any single direction, because you're not concentrating it like you would in other screens. So if you have lighting, controlled lighting situation, yes, you can use reflective paint, and reflective paint comes in different shades and colors for conditions as well. So choose carefully, but yes, you can. I've used it very successfully.
Good, Courtney.
Yeah, I was looking around. Also be careful. There's retroreflective paint, which is used for reflecting light right back to the source. And that's used for, if you're doing front projection with the camera and a beam splitter, you could use that. I did find a company called projectorscreen.com that has this ultra short throw paint. It's a bit pricey. Oops. Oh, gosh. No, I don't need help. Thank you. Anyway, it's about $249 a gallon, so it's a bit pricey. but it's designed for doing exactly what Marty was talking about, controlling the light reflection from different angles. And this is designed for reflecting from a short throw projector, which would be close to the screen and in front, and reflecting that back out straight. So it controls the angle of reflection.
And one of the things that is important is obviously the smoothness of whatever you're painting. So a lot of times what we've done is, we've done this on walls before, and we make sure that obviously the surface starts smooth, but we usually put a couple coats of primer on, a couple gray coats of primer on. So it's 2 or 3 or 4 coats of gray that are very close to the color of the actual screen. And then we put the screen on, and usually it's usually 2 coats of that as well to kind of fill it in. But it's the smoothness of that is going to make a big difference in the experience on that. So it does take a bit of work to get it done. But we've been pretty successful at it. We had a huge wall in Pixel Core that was painted, and it was a fun way to watch movies. So that's usually we had movie afternoons on Fridays to enjoy it. That's what we built it for. Next question.
Zach Stahl-Smith, Chautauqua, New York. Has anyone worked with Dante AV products? Should Dante just stick with audio and leave video to NDI?
Guy?
It has its place for sure. I mean, it's basically really expensive if you want to go 444, 4K 60. It's the protocol to use because it's fast. Or, I mean, if you don't want to go 2110. So when the protocol first came out, I had Bolin ship me over a camera, which was the world's first Dante AV camera, and I had to get the decoder as well. So it's a 2-part system, and it was direct point-to-point. So it was over Cat 5, Cat 6, 7, 8, and you would decode to SDI baseband. So I was like, how do I get this into my vMix system? And they're like, well, it's not traditional. You would then use Dante software, it's called Studio, and then you could bring it in as a webcam into a software switcher. So it's not for everybody. It's more for like a projection because it's subframe latency. So NDI as opposed to Dante AV, you're talking about richer color, and now with 6, they came out with 10-bit color for and HDR for NDI 6. So up until last month, this was a thing where NDI wasn't as robust as far as the color space, and Dante AV would win in that regard. If you wanted iMag, like got a big, rich LED wall or something like that, you want the richest color. Dante AV is still the way to go if you're not going to go SDR 2110. So there's reasons to use it, and the growing list is amazing. If you go to Audinate's site, the adopters, it's growing big time. AJ's got a device, and so there's a lot more people jumping on board. So you'll see more of it, but they've definitely got a lot of work to do to get it inroads into all the places, and they got to lower the price. In fact, I just saw a massive price discount from the stuff that I had tested. It's half off, so they're trying to get adoption.
Yeah, and stay tuned. We're going to be doing a lot more with Audinate. We had some great conversations at NAB, and before that, as we got ready for NAB. So we're going to be doing some trainings, and they're going to get more involved with what we're doing. So you'll be able to ask a lot of these questions more directly. Next question.
Werner Pritchard in Zurich, Switzerland says, I heard a rumor that Alex is in the mastermind behind the new Telestrator iPad app. Is this true? What's the latest news? And he finishes with, it's my birthday next week, just saying.
Warner, if you contact me directly on Discord, I'll send you can get on the test flight for it if you're interested in it. We're very close. Juan Robles is the one that's writing it, and he is very close. I think we're doing some rewriting of some of the infrastructure, but once that's done, we'll be releasing it. But it is in test flight, and if people contact me directly, I can let you on. Next question.
Duncan in Melbourne, Australia says, what are the panel thoughts on 2110 and the uptake of it in corporate live events?
I think it's going to change dramatically because of what Blackmagic did. So Blackmagic has, again, pushed things forward faster than the industry was ready. They built their own format for some of the 4K stuff. It's still the same format for the 1080p, by the way. And so they are pressing forward with a lot of their products. And because there's such a large corporate usage of Blackmagic hardware, I think you're going to see more 2110 kind of proliferating because of those supports. And so I think this is what needed to happen for 2110 to get more support. If you look at the router that they announced, it may seem like a lot. It's to almost $3,000. But I was talking to someone that works on 2110. They're like, that's less than the controller for a normal 2110 router. So they've really made it much more cost effective. I think that the hard challenge in corporate is that so many people are using NDI. So, I think 2110 was way too slow out of the gate, in getting in. Part of it is also that they started adopting, they gave up on adopting only license-free solutions. And so now there's a lot of costs that are related to 2110, or can be. And so that has slowed their adoption down as well. So I think that it's going to be interesting to see how this all kind of pans out. But I think if it's got a chance, I think Blackmagic has given it more of a chance than it had. There's, of course, there's big trucks and there's big infrastructure, but NDI took a lot of ground while 2110 was trying to figure out which way was out the door. Next question.
Paul Wallace in Hot Springs says, a lot of us are building homebrew LED walls, in quotes, using 85-inch, 95-inch, and so forth TVs, aspiring to be like Jeff Keathley. What are the pointers for setting these up for best results as a Zoom panelist?
I think that we've talked about it a little bit in the past, but of course, you want a little bit of distance so that field of view can drop out. A larger sensor on your camera will make that look a lot better, because you'll have less tendency to pick up any moire or see any idiosyncrasies. You're going to want to make sure that you can lean that forward. So, if you have lights up here, you're going to want typically just a little bit of a lean down, not a lot. You'll start to see vanishing points and so on and so forth, but a little bit down. And if you have a person at a desk here, and we've done this entire throw has been about 15 feet between here and where the back of the camera is here, and that's worked fine for us with a 2/3 inch sensor. But anyway, so you want to be thinking about this leaning down just a little bit, being able to adjust it up and down makes a big difference. So there's a couple different things you want to be able to adjust. We like to put the cameras on a ped, the person on an adjustable chair, and the TV, especially an 85-inch, on some kind of hydraulic lift or motorized lift that we can move it up and down, so that all of those things can be adjusted to make them correct for each person. Because as people are different heights and so on and so forth, being able to adjust those three things, and sometimes the desk as well, really makes a difference in being able to really get it exactly the way you want it. So those are some things to think about as you start to build out. Next question.
David Brady in New York City. Up next, local and lightweight media asset managers. While searching for something to help corral video assets and more, NeoFinder bubbled to the top. Does anyone have any experience with it?
We have not. I have not used NeoFinder, so I'm not sure. I'm not sure, especially for local and lightweight MAMs. I haven't looked at that. We'll have to take a closer look, maybe even get them on the show. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Douglas Carmichael, and Douglas says, when would it be beneficial to use a monitor controller like the RTW Touch Control 5 when your mixer has a dedicated monitor bus? And he has a link to the product there.
Good, Mickey.
Yeah, it certainly depends on the use case. In a live sound reinforcement environment, I don't see a use case or much of a use case for a monitor controller, but say in a broadcast or recording studio environment, say for broadcast, you would want to, if you are, for example, encoding to Dolby AC3, EAC3 or AC4, or encoding to some format, typically you would want to send your your main mix out to the encoder, and then send the encoded signal to a decoder, and then you monitor off of the decoder, so you are actually listening to what you are broadcasting out. In these situations, you would have multiple sources you may want to switch between in terms of your monitoring. So having a monitoring controller that has a multitude of inputs can allow you to switch between the different sources in your studio environment. And the same is true if, say, you just need to program, for example, a QLab for any sound effects or music cues. You may want to route that to a separate set of monitors. That's where a monitor controller comes in handy. In a recording studio environment, it's the same deal. Like, say, if you are mixing a theatrical mix, you would want to be able to switch over from monitoring the output of your console, your mixing console, or say your DAW, to monitoring the output of your Dolby Cinema processor, to monitoring, just a simple output of a laptop. And you may have multiple sets of monitors as well. That's when a monitor controller can come in handy. When I'm mixing a live broadcast remotely, I have the full program mix going out to my main big monitors. Then I have my monitor bus or Q bus coming into my near field so that I can solo something. It comes out nice and clear and right in front of me.
Coming up next, we'll be talking about audio, and we just want to remind you that, of course, we have a lot of Q&A this week, a result of last week being so heavy. So if you've got questions, we've got answers, or we've got at least opinions that'll be coming up here. So the next couple of days will all be Q&A, so bring your questions, and we're going to kick some of these questions back today. We had a lot of them, but remember, you can always bring those back forward. Volunteer meeting is this Saturday, if you'd like to come and find out what we're working on there. And also, we need you. We need your help. To keeping this on, go to officehours.global/donate and give what you think it makes sense to keep us going. Welcome back. And we are talking about analog audio interconnections. And to kick this off, what we're going to do is going to throw it to Marty, and he's got a couple slides to get us started. Take it away, Marty.
Okay, so interconnections with audio. We have microphones, we have musical instruments, we have line level devices, we have computers, we have all kinds of audio sources that have outputs that need to go into somewhere. So we got gazoutas and we got gazintas. And, the first thing that we want to consider is what is the output level of the device that we're coming from? And so there are all kinds of devices. So we start out at the bottom with a dynamic microphone, which has a very, very low voltage output. And in this chart, you can see on the left side, typical output voltage of different types of devices. And on the right side, the dBu levels and even the dB full screen measurements that you would typically see on a console. So a dynamic microphone, then above that is a condenser microphone that can go up to 200 millivolts. And then we have a musical instrument that can go up to 1 volt, and so on and so forth. A pro line level device would have 1.228 volts. Typically would show up as a +4 dBu, nominal level on a peak reading meter of -18. We go all the way up to speaker levels, which can go up to 145 volts for a high-powered amplifier, 100 volts for many different types of speaker lines, for 100-volt speaker lines, for example. Console at clipping could go up to 10 to 19 volts, and on the dBu scale would go, up to +21 or +28. So we want to match the input to the type of output. So in a lot of inputs, there might be a mic line switch, for example. The output of many wireless microphone receivers would have a mic line switch and would change the output level from a -50 microphone output to a +4 line level output. And so the next thing would be whether it's a unbalanced line, output line, or a balanced line. So on an unbalanced line, you have just 2 wires, the hot and the ground. Ground doubles as shield in this case. And you can see that there's a signal there, and there could also be noise that's introduced into the line. Noise can come from transformers, it can come from dimmers, it can come from LED walls, it can come from radio transmitters. Lots of different devices can emit electromagnetic noise into the environment that can be picked up on a wire, because in certain cases a wire can actually act as a transmitter. As a wireless antenna, and that gets amplified by the input stage, and you'll see on the output that there is noise on the output. A balance line is a rather novel way of being able to cancel out that kind of noise that's introduced into the wire, because you have a twisted pair of wires plus the shield that surrounds them. And the idea is that the two wires are opposite in polarity. So the signal on one wire is an opposite polarity from the other. And when noise gets introduced into those two wires, they are introduced on both conductors in the same polarity. And so on the input stage, which inverts one wire from the other, it's canceled out and you have clean output. And on a balanced audio line, you have 3 pins typically on an XLR connector, sometimes can be a 1/4-inch connector. Pin 1 is always ground. Pin 2 is the hot, where the polarity is positive, and pin 3 gets your negative polarity. And sometimes you have transformers in the line. Transformers are naturally balanced, and they are passive devices as opposed to an electronically balanced device, which requires power and active electronics. Transformers are passive devices. They need no power. And in a transformer, the added benefit is that the communication line between the output and input are electrically isolated from the actual electronics that are feeding it and that they are feeding into. So you have electrical isolation and you have radio frequency isolation and noise isolation. So here's a chart that I've created that I use for classes that I teach and for church clients and such like that. And this illustrates all of the most popular connectors, their application, their pinouts, and their usage. And so this explains how different connectors are used and what their use is for. Also gives you typical voltage levels. And I am going to post a link in the chat, in the Mukana chat, so that you can download and get this documentation for everybody to use.
And one of the things that I think is important is a lot of times there are different missions that these can have. So, for instance, a TRS can also be a stereo, and so it can be balanced audio or stereo. So, understanding where you're going and where and how those look are important. So, also, we get into understanding that like an XLR can also be a DMX, and so these are, I think that a lot of times understanding what each cable does becomes really important as we start to pass these signals through, and making those conversions. So like, for instance, a good example is a a USB pre 2. One of the things you get into is you can convert to get back to the voltage that Marty's talking about. The mic inputs are designed for mic inputs. They are going to amplify those mic inputs. They are assuming they're getting, if they are XLR in, they're assuming that this is a mic level input. There are TRS also in the mix pre, or in the USB pre 2. Those are assuming line input, and so they're at a different voltage, and they don't trade back and forth. So just converting from TRS to XLR is not going to solve the problem that the XLRs are amplifying. The XLR inputs are expecting a different voltage. Go ahead, Jeff.
So, Marty, thanks a lot for that. These 4 big categories of signals: mic, instrument, line, and speaker. And they're really kind of categories because they're more than just level. They're also talking about, as you said, whether they're balanced or unbalanced, and also what are the relative impedances typically of the outputs and inputs. So when we talk about microphone as a category, it is the electricity that microphones put out, but it is also what is expected on the other end. A mic preamp is also, the input to a mic preamp is also a mic category signal, and then that mic preamp will amplify that signal up to line level. And then we'll get into talking about impedance a little bit later, but generally that mic, at least pro microphones, are the category, this very low level, and it varies quite a lot, as you said, whether they're condenser or dynamic or ribbon microphones. And of course, audio is always going up and down in level because we talk louder, we talk quieter, or we have music that gets louder and softer. So these are general areas or categories of level. And so microphones and mic inputs to mic preamps, those are all in the mic category signal. The other thing that is a mic category signal is the output of direct boxes. Instruments, those tend to be things that are instruments, electric guitars, electric basses, keyboards, those are all in the instrument output category, and things that receive instrument level are things that you typically plug instruments into. So that would be guitar amps, guitar pedals, stomp boxes, and then also direct boxes. Line level is most of our studio gear, and it's fairly usually well behaved. And then speaker level is what puts out speaker level are amplifiers, power amplifiers and headphone amplifiers. And then what accepts speaker level are speakers and headphones. So those are also that whole category. Now, generally, speaker level is unbalanced because it's so much louder than all of the potential noise influences. So we let speakers be unbalanced. Line level is typically balanced. Mic is typically balanced. Instruments, unfortunately, are typically unbalanced, and that's one of the problems that we have with instrument level things. I'm going to pass off to Mickey here.
Go, Mickey.
Yeah, but I just want to emphasize what Alex mentioned earlier about different connectors not always being a specific type of connection, line level, mic level, balance, unbalanced. Say, for example, there are a bunch of sound devices products that have multiple TA3 ins and outs, but some of them are TA3 that carry a full balanced line level signals, but some are TA3 that is unbalanced consumer line level stereo. So it's important to know exactly what each connector in your equipment is wired for. A lot of the product manuals have pin configurations at the end of the manual so that you know how exactly they are wired. The same is true with your cables. How are your cables wired? If it is a TA5, how is each one of those 5 pins plus the shell wired? Because it could be designed for totally different use cases. Being aware of different pin configurations, and as well as how to use a simple continuity testers so that you can test how your cables are wired could be very useful in the field.
Go to Courtney.
Yeah, and let's talk about longevity of type of connector, because you can have balanced connectors on tip ring shield. A lot of audio mixers have a combo jacks that are both, and they can be XLRs. I always try and get ones with XLR inputs because this type of connector wear is a lot better than TRS. If you look at a TRS cross section, you can see here that your area of contact on a tip ring shield when you insert that is just this little bent piece of metal here, which is spring loaded, which contacts the barrel of the ring here, and the same thing is true of the tip, just this tiny little contact level. And since the TRS is exposed, you can, when you grab it, you're touching the pins, it gets exposed to the weather, it gets exposed to stuff in your junk box, so it can build up schmutz or junk on the TRS plug. And so if you happen to get a little piece of schmutz right where that one contact place is, it can create a capacitive connection. Even nose grease or something from your handling can create noise. And that's why TRS, a lot of times you'll twist them and you'll hear, especially if they're carrying any type of voltage like phantom power or even the 1.5 volts or 5 volts for electret condensers. They're much more prone to being noisy. However, in the XLR connectors, each of those pins in the XLR connectors goes into a surrounding connector that surrounds it on all sides, and so it makes more contact, and it has a wiping motion when it goes in, and it goes in. The orientation of the pin to the female side is the same every time that's put in, unlike a TRS connector. So it cleans self-cleaning and more points of connection. So keep your powder dry and your connectors clean, folks, and you'll have less noise problem.
Go ahead, Marty.
Right. So just following up on what everybody has said, the connector type does not always determine the kind of signal that's on it. Connectors are just physical devices, and you can put any kind of signal you want through it. There are certain standards, like, audio balanced in an XLR connector has a certain standard pinout that you can rely on. But it can be used as an unbalanced connector as well. TRS connectors, whether they be quarter-inch or mini plugs, are notorious for being used for different things in different ways. An RCA connector is pretty reliably an unbalanced audio signal, but can also be a digital signal as well. And TA connectors, for example, can be used for many different things. TA connectors are used for wireless microphone input connectors. They can have 3, 4, or 5 different pins used in different ways. And so it's always good to verify the pinout of connectors using the manufacturer's documentation. Something we hadn't touched on yet is impedance. Impedance is really important, both output impedance and input impedance as well. The input impedance determines the load on the signal. The lower the impedance, the heavier the load. More load decreases the signal level and can also change the frequency response that you're receiving from the source. There's a very interesting video from a conference that cloud lifters, cloud microphones participated in that talked about the effect of impedance on input impedance as a load on microphones and instruments. And incidentally, Cloud makes this device called a Cloud Lifter Z that has a knob you can rotate to change the load impedance on whatever you've plugged into it, whether it be a microphone or an instrument, and how it changes the characteristic of the sound as you're changing the load impedance. Instrument DIs, yes, another one that is impedance-based, as well as converting the voltage level and the current. Instruments like guitars and such, they're high impedance devices. So the output impedance is very high compared to, say, a microphone, which has typically 150 ohms output impedance. An instrument can have a 10,000 ohm output impedance. And so you generally want to have your input impedance much higher than your output impedance. On a microphone network, for example, a microphone would have 150 ohm output impedance, but a preamp would have typically a 1500 ohm, so 10 times the input impedance. So 1500 ohm input impedance. Some are much higher, some are in the 10,000 ohm range, and that can make a difference on the sound that the microphone puts out. Loudspeakers are typically 8 ohms, whereas an power amplifier can have an output of much lower than that. So it's really important to match your impedances as well.
And to get back to balanced versus unbalanced, why are a lot of instrument connections not balanced? Is that is there a scientific reason for it, or is it just that they weren't built that way?
Yeah, it's the kind of pickup system that is used in say an electric guitar is a magnetic pickup and goes through a bit of electronics for volume control, tone control, and it's just an unbalanced output. There are some guitars that do have active electronics in them that will put out a balanced signal and even a line level signal.
Go ahead, Jeff.
So going back to the TRS connector, one of the things that we need to be careful about is when microphones are run over TRS, because the XLR was designed that all 3 pins mate and disconnect at the same time. So if phantom power is on, the phantom power connects correctly, But if you use a TRS connector with phantom power, it will short out because the tip will connect to ground as you insert the plug, and then tip will connect to ring, and then tip will finally connect to tip. And so that will actually short out your phantom power on the way. So always a good idea to disconnect, to turn off phantom power before you disconnect or connect anything that's connected through TRS connections. So that's why XLR was designed for microphones. TRS can be a balanced mono one-channel signal. And it can also be, as Alex said, a stereo unbalanced signal. And that can get some real confusion for people. So if we look at the TRS, when it's unbalanced, the tip is the left signal, the ring is the right signal, and the sleeve is the common ground. But when it's balanced balanced mono, the tip is the hot, the ring is the cold, and the sleeve is the shield. Well, if you take, say, the output of your phone, if you still have a phone that has an analog output, and you plug it as a TRS unbalanced stereo into a mono balanced TRS connector, you will connect the left to the hot and the right to the cold, and now the differential input will take the difference between the left and the right, and essentially canceling everything that is the mono component of the signal. Anything that's the same. So if you're listening to music, all of a sudden, the kick, the snare, and the vocals are going to go away because you've just taken the left minus the right by plugging that in.
Which is great for a homegrown karaoke.
I wouldn't use the words great, but yeah.
Yeah, that's how it be. We wired that up when I was a kid. We did that just specifically to get, like, it's kind of a karaoke. I mean, you can still hear some of the things.
Poor man's vocal eliminator.
Yeah, exactly. Let's go ahead and jump. Go ahead, Jeff. Go ahead, Jeff. Keep going.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about impedance and the difference between active and passive devices. So passive devices are things that create electricity without any additional electronics or power with them. So that would be ribbon microphones and dynamic microphones, and that would be passive instruments, so typical electric guitars and electric basses. Those are the real problem child in electrical configuration. Anything that is active, that requires a power source, and it has some circuitry that someone has designed, they've designed the output impedance of that device to be a little bit better behaved. So what is impedance? Well, the three big things in electricity are voltage, current, and resistance or impedance. So voltage is electromotive force. It is the push. It's the thing that pushes electrons. And then current is the flow of those electrons. And then resistance is the resistance to the flow. And resistance is the word we use when we're talking about a steady push, direct current. And impedance is the complex one we use when we're talking about something that has alternating current and a frequency. So because we're talking about the frequencies that human beings can hear and sound going, representing that as electricity, we're talking about impedance. Now, most things that are designed as circuitry are well behaved, meaning they have similar impedance or the same impedance all the way from 20 hertz low frequencies up to 20 kilohertz high frequencies. And so when we say a microphone has 150 ohm to give you an output, they've designed it that the output impedance is 150 ohms all the way from 20 hertz past 20 kilohertz. But if it's an SM58, that's a dynamic mic, the output impedance is based on the physical stuff that they had to use to build the mic, which in the case of a dynamic mic is a coil of wire and a magnet. And so that's going to react a little bit differently at different frequencies. The worst case being, Leo Fender and his electric guitar pickup. It's a coil of wire around a magnet, and we wiggle a metal string in that magnetic field, and we get the sounds of guitars. But they have a different impedance at different frequencies. And impedance is this weird thing that we think about. It's hard to think about, but everywhere where you're sitting, there is an open electrical outlet hanging out in the wall, right? Everyone's got several of them sitting around with nothing plugged into them. And your power company is sending 120 volts, if you're in the US, of alternating current to those two prongs. but you're not being electrified in the room because air has a very, 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 very high impedance. So electricity is not flowing out through the air, thankfully. So impedance is the resistance. It can, yes. I'm hoping it's not happening to any of our listeners right now.
Yeah, exactly.
So that impedance is the thing that resists the flow. If you have a low impedance, if you were to stick a paper clip in there, it would demand all kinds of current. It would create a load on the source. So low input impedances demand current. So what we do, what Marty talked about, is we typically have low output impedances and high input impedances so that when we take a microphone and we plug it into a mic preamp, the mic preamp does not demand that the microphone give it current. Because an SM58 is creating electricity simply by talking into it, so it doesn't have a lot of current to supply. So we don't want the mic preamp to demand current. In the case of amplifiers to speakers, that speaker level category, something different has to happen there. We have to get work done. We have to actually move speakers and make sound. So that's where we need maximum power transfer, and that's where we have very similar impedances. So we have 2, 4, or 8 ohms low output impedance on the amplifier, and we have like 8 ohm speakers, and we get lots of work done. Work is that watts, the power. We're actually getting speakers to move and make sound. But in all the other cases, we want a low to high relationship. We want a high input impedance and a low output impedance. Electric guitars, as Marty said, have a problematic output impedance. They tend to be somewhat high in and of themselves, and they're different at different frequencies. So an electric guitar needs to plug into something with a very, very, very high input impedance, and that's either a guitar amp or it's a direct box. So
and
a direct box is going to have...
You see when you hear high Z, is that right? This is the thing you're looking for then?
High Z is our letter for impedance. So high Z is the high input impedance. And direct boxes are very, very high Z. They're going to be a mega ohm, 1 million ohms of impedance.
And oftentimes that's where, when you talk to folks that tour just with their guitar, they'll, an acoustic guitar, they'll be like, I have a direct box in my guitar. Like, I walk into a thing and they don't want to, they want to know that they can produce a signal that others can manage. And what is the process of that direct box? What makes it a good direct box or a bad direct box?
So remember, the instrument is unbalanced. Mm-hmm. So we always want to keep our unbalanced lines very short. And then the direct box is going to take a instrument category signal as its input. So that's typically 1/4 inch TS unbalanced. It's that instrument level, and the direct box is going to provide a very high input impedance, very, very high, 10 times higher than the 10,000 ohm output impedance of the guitar. And we're going to put it close to the guitar, and it's going to give us out a balanced pro level, microphone level XLR mic category signal. Direct boxes also come in passive and active. So passive ones are purely based on a transformer, and they're going to use a transformer to do the balancing and to do impedance reflection. So a transformer will increase the impedance of whatever device it's plugged into, or there will be active direct boxes that require either a battery or phantom power or being plugged into the wall to provide power. And generally, the good rule of thumb is if you have a passive instrument, you need an active direct box, because an active direct box is going to provide that very high input impedance. And if you have an active instrument, so you have an acoustic guitar with a battery in it, or you have a bass with a battery in it, and it's already got the electronics taken care of, then it's okay to use a passive direct box, because a passive direct box, you cannot distort by sending too big of a signal to it.
These direct boxes are as little as $30 and as much as $3,000. What are you looking for? What are some of the ones that are the most important?
So I'm looking for matching that passive instrument to active DI, or active DI, or active instrument to passive DI. And then usually they will have the ability to isolate the system ground. So if the instrument is only plugged into the direct box, then the entire shielding, grounding of the instrument needs to come from the direct box. But if the instrument is also connected not only to the audio system, but also plugged into the direct box and then daisy chained through that into a guitar amp, that guitar amp is plugged into the wall and it will provide a ground system. And so if the audio system and the guitar amp are on different ground voltages, then I may need to separate those two to remove that hum. So I'm looking for a switch that's got a DI that's got a hum ground isolate switch on it. If I'm dealing with computer stuff, I may want a direct box that has line level inputs. So they may deal with higher level outputs from a computer headphone output, which is going to be consumer line level, not quite as high as our Pro. It will also be unbalanced. And then there are direct boxes that actually can accept something as high as speaker level, that you could actually take the high power output.
And we get the questions starting to roll in, so we'll get to those in just a second. Go ahead, Marty.
All right. So direct boxes can be passive, which means they have a transformer in them, or they can be active with electronic amplifiers in them. As Jeff was saying, one of the biggest challenges in a direct box, because of the difference conversion from high impedance to low impedance, is isolating the ground, the shield, which are two different things, and electrically, and isolating from interference from radio signals getting into the wire. With a transformer, there are different grades of transformers using different kinds of wire, different gauges of wire, the number of windings in the transformer, and whether the transformer has what's called galvanic shielding, which shields radio interference from the primary winding to the secondary winding. Then there's the electrical ground when you have it connected to an amplifier as well. These are fairly complex design choices that are made that affect the cost of the unit. And then similar to a direct box, there's another device that we haven't touched on yet, is microphone splitters. So when you have multiple mixing consoles in a show system, you may have a PA console, you may have a broadcast console, you may have a monitor console. So 3 different consoles that are receiving the signal from microphones. With digital systems, digital consoles, we take a digital split from the preamplifier, which is in the stage box on stage. But the more traditional way to do that is to put a microphone splitter on stage, which has transformers with multiple windings in them. So a single transformer would have an input winding that comes from the microphone and then multiple output windings. Each winding goes to a different console. You have to figure out a way to get phantom power to condenser microphones. Of course, dynamic microphones don't need phantom power. But each of those consoles, each of the windings on the transformer have to be physically, electrically, and radio frequency and grounding isolated from each other, so they can get rather complex. The other thing that we haven't touched on yet, which is really important, is the kind of wire that is used to connect output devices to input devices. There's typical balanced audio mic cable, which has 2 conductors that are twisted pair inside of a shield.
And the twisted pair is important, right? So the twisted pair is important because otherwise, if they get separated, they're going to have different noise variations, right? If those aren't, that's why the twisted is important, is they're really existing in the same noise field.
That's right. Twisted pair means when the wires are twisted, it means there's more of a chance of any radio frequency or magnetic noise frequency interference getting into both conductors in the same polarity and the same phase, which means that the balanced input can cancel them out.
Right.
So, by the way, all stems out of telephone transmission lines that were spanned miles and miles and miles across the country. And they didn't have a shield. They didn't have a ground. Well, they had a ground because they had stakes in the ground, but they could be in different cities. So a twisted pair without a shield is just as effective. And they were raised above the ground, and they were very effective. It was very important to be able to put the correct transformers with the correct impedances at the sending end as well as the receiving end to maximize the signal level and to balance them for noise reduction. Unbalanced signals would have a single wire and shield. For a line level unbalanced signal, you can use a coaxial cable, which is a center conductor with a insulation around it and shield that's wrapped around that. Or you can use just a single conductor wire, two conductor wire with one is hot and one is ground. But for instruments, because of the high impedance, there's very special wires, very special coaxial wire that's used. It's built in a way that minimizes any kind of noise from mechanically moving the wire around. So that keeps that a low noise as well because there's no differential input to cancel out that kind of noise.
Let's go ahead and jump into the questions.
First one comes from Andy Kokendorfer in Viera, Florida, and Andy wonders, any new interfaces for quiet mics? I just can't give up my SM7B, he notes.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Well, this is probably not what you're looking for because it's really a mic preamp and not an interface, but it does have Dante. I just been checking out the RME 12 mic D, which puts in one rack space, 12 remote-controlled mic preamps that have up to 75 dB of gain, and it goes right to Dante for that. So you may want to take a look at some RME interfaces. They have smaller than that interfaces that may give you plenty of gain.
Good morning.
And depending on whether you want to get an analog output or a digital output from these devices, there's two different kinds of three different kinds of devices. Three you can look for. There's a mic to line amplifier, which is a preamplifier that converts to line level output, has an analog output. There's that same kind of device that might have a USB output for digital, and then there's a phantom-powered dynamic mic amplifier, such as a cloud lifter, or there are other devices from other companies. Still keeping within the range of a microphone level, but boosts it up to a dynamic microphone, boosts it up to what a condenser microphone would typically output.
Good, Mickey.
Yeah, I quickly went through this last week, but I think most decent audio interfaces nowadays can provide adequate gain for something like an SM7B when used for speech. The key is adequate gain staging. Like typically, you'd want your initial gauge stage, your head amp or your preamp, to bring your microphone signal in at a relatively conservative level. With your peaks landing between -10 and -20 dBFS, not any louder than -10 dBFS. And then you use the dynamics control to control the peaks so that you can bring the overall makeup gain up to your final delivery level. And in a full broadcast processing chain, you'd have many stages of dynamics control. So if your final delivery spec, whatever it may be, is something loud, like say a typical Zoom meeting, you don't want to crank your headphone amp, your preamp or your head amp all the way directly to that final delivery loudness. You want to bring it in conservative, control it, and then bring it to that spec.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. He says, my Yamaha DM3 has 16 inputs, but only 4 combination XLR quarter-inch inputs. I've connected unbalanced synths to the combo inputs, but would I be safe connecting unbalanced sources to the XLR inputs without a DI box in between for short distances?
Mickey?
Yeah, assuming the output of these instruments or synths are indeed line level, either pro line level, professional line level, or consumer line level. As long as you keep these unbalanced connections short and free from interference, you should be fine. But if these outputs on the instrument are instrument level at the high instrument impedance that Jeff mentioned earlier, then you would definitely want to go through a direct box first to transform that into a balanced signal that is at microphone impedance.
Go, Jeff.
So what Doug's talking about is a combi jack, which gives you both XLR and quarter-inch on the same real estate on the back of the thing. There are separate pins, and so what I imagine they've done inside there is they've prevented phantom power from getting to the quarter-inch parts of that. But the actual analog circuitry downstream is the same on the first four with the combi jacks and the XLR inputs. So it's exactly the same line or mic preamp. It's the same 10 kilo ohm input impedance. So from an active keyboard, your impedance will be fine because it is an active device that will have as Mickey said, a consumer line level output, and will have a fairly well-behaved low impedance output. So your impedance matching will be fine. What you want to make sure is that you don't accidentally turn on phantom power through that XLR to quarter-inch adapter.
Next question.
Jesse Mills in the San Francisco Bay Area says, I need to buy several balanced to unbalanced converters to run between mixers and ATEM mini line-in inputs. I know about the J-ISO and the SB6. Anything else out there with super clean pass-through?
Mickey?
So yeah, Jesse mentioned the radial J-ISO, which I'm a big fan of. I think my oldest one is close to 20 years old and it still works. He also mentioned the StageBug 6 from Radial as well. Another model that people seem to like, I haven't tried it myself. I believe Jeff Francis does use it, is the CleanBox Pro from Art.
Go ahead, Marty.
Yeah, and there's a device from Morley. It used to be EBTech that is called a line level shifter. And it's a desktop box or floor box with quarter-inch inputs and XLR outputs. Actually, it's got both inputs and outputs, quarter-inch and XLR. So this changes from unbalanced to balanced and from -10 to +4 as well. There's a couple of different versions of this device that you can find on Morley's website.
Next question.
Samuel Nordvik in Norway says, can you explain the technical difference between active and passive DI boxes?
Good, Jeff.
Passive DI boxes are based on a transformer. So they just take the electrical signal through and a transformer is an electromagnetic device. So it is a electrical input that goes to a coil of wire that creates a magnetic field. And right next to it, so you have a coil of wire on one side and you have another coil of wire, and they do not actually touch. So the magnetism is what converts. So we go from electricity to magnetism, changing magnetic field, and then magnetism back to electricity. So it only works for alternating current. And here's a little summary of the difference between active and passive. It's whether if they require power, they're active and they have circuitry to them. They can distort, but they do a better job of impedance matching, providing a very, very high input impedance for whatever instrument source you have there.
Next question.
Henry Bramos in Yonkers, New York says, what's the most common gauge audio cable used in live events to avoid most common noise from power cables and so forth?
I think the correct answer here is it depends. So it oftentimes depends on how long that run is as well. Go ahead, Marty.
Exactly. The gauge of the wire will determine, every wire has losses on a per foot basis. And the larger the gauge, the lower the loss. There are also other factors such as capacitance that is a part of the impedance formula, capacitance between the conductors, between all three of the conductors. There's the resistance over length, and there's even inductance, which is a different type of, also part of the impedance formula. The type of insulation that's used around the conductors, any insulation that's between the conductors, the density of the twist of the conductors, all factor into what kind of losses and at what frequencies those losses will be at. So a larger conductor cable can run for longer distances with a lower level loss per foot, and then the types of insulations around them will determine the impedance, the characteristic impedance of the wire. Incidentally, when it comes to wire, the impedance of the wire is also important. With analog audio, the typical impedance of a wire is around 75 ohms. But when we start getting into digital signals, the impedance becomes much more important. And we want to look for a wire that has 110 ohms impedance for digital signals, because that will maintain the shape of the digital waveform much more effectively, and you'll find less bit losses and less errors in 110 ohm wire than you will in, say, an analog wire.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, there's no like hard and fast rule in terms of wire gauges. But what I use and what I come across most often in terms of microphone cables and also line level patch cables are 24 gauge wire for those individual microphone cables and line level patches. But for like within a snake cable, each core I typically come across 26 and 28 gauge wire inside a snake.
Courtney?
Another method of canceling noise is star quad canaries cable, which uses 4 conductors, and the way that they're helically wound inside there, you connect them up like the blues to one connector and the whites to the other connector, and the way that they're wound inside cancels a lot of the hum that comes in. So star quad cable is a good solution. The other thing is the quality of the shielding. You got to pay attention to that, because some shielding, they cheapen out on the braiding, and so it's not 100% shielding. And the best shielding I've found out there is EMT cable that has it's called Roycean shielding, which is a spiral wrap copper in one direction and then another spiral wrap in the opposite direction. And those 2 spiral wraps have a very long longevity. I used cables that had that type of shielding for 20 years, and they didn't break down. Foil shielding is effective, but does not wear well. It breaks down easily, and you'll get problems of noise getting in.
And would you say that, like for building a cable, that Neutrik connected, some of the standard Neutrik connectors mixed with a star quad is probably the top of the line solution?
Yeah, that's standard of the industry.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jeff.
Gauge really matters when you're down in the very low impedances of speaker level, because we think of wire as being a conductor, but it does have some amount of resistance or impedance per foot. And so if you're running hundreds of feet of wire, that will increase the amount of resistance in the wire. If you're talking about impedances for line level where the destination is 2,000, 2,500, or 10,000 ohms, a few ohms in the wire doesn't make a big difference. But if the speaker is 8 ohms and you've got 4 ohms in the wire, that's half of what the speaker is, and now you've increased the entire system input impedance that the amplifier is seeing. Sorry, the destination, the load impedance, is now not 8, it's 12, because the wire has played such a factor in that. That's one of the reasons that speakers tend to use, speaker level uses large gauge, big fat wire. The other reason is there's a lot of current flowing through there. In order to get work done, power is voltage times current. You got to have both large voltages and large current if you want to get work done. So we need lots of current flowing through the wire. Mic level category, instrument category, line category, none of them are They are all destination impedances are large, so very little current is actually flowing, so we don't need large wires for the current to flow through.
So what you're saying is that you can't take your extension cord and just cut the ends off and put it into your speakers. Not that I would ever do that when I was a kid.
You can for short distance. You just want to keep speaker lines short, which is one of the many benefits of active speakers is they put the amplifiers right next to the speakers. An additional one is that we've now made the crossovers line level.
I think when I was before I was probably 16 or 17, I think all my speakers were connected with some version of extension cord cable. So then I became, like I started buying speaker wire that had nice connectors and all the other things. Next question.
Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana is up next. On what basis do you decide to throw away an audio cable rather than repair it?
Mickey?
Yeah, I'd say like if you come across damaged cables and you re-terminate it, the only I guess downside or negative of that newly repaired cable is that it's a little shorter. So for me, as when it gets to the point where the length doesn't make sense in terms of being useful, then that's when I throw it. But otherwise, just re-terminate.
Go ahead, Bill.
For me, it's about 2 meters or 6 foot. Anything below that, I'm just going to replace. Anything above that, I'm probably going to rewire. And the only question here is it an intermittent problem? If there's anything intermittent, a bad solder joint or something, I'll dump it immediately because I don't want it to fool me into thinking it's good and then find out later that somebody moves it and it's bad.
Good, Courtney.
There are a couple of ways a cable can fail. One is the solder joint breaks on the inside of the connector, and so one of the wires becomes disconnected or loose and rattling around inside that connector that creates noise. The other way is the shielding starts to break down. If it's the first problem where the wire and the connector is broken loose, resolder the connections and you're good to go. You replace a cable, especially a cable if it's one that's used where it's not in a permanent installation. You're throwing it out, you're wrapping it up, and you're unwrapping it, wrapping it constantly, daily basis. The shields can wear out, especially if they have a foil shield. But even a braided shield with enough flexion and bending, the braid starts to break down and those small little wires in that braid start to break and it gets noisy. So if you hear cable noise, you've got a good connection, you put it in the cable tester and it says, nope, all 3 pins are connected and the shield's connected. So you have continuity, but when you handle it, it makes noise. That means the shield is breaking down, or sometimes the internal connectors are breaking down, but usually it's a shield. And there's no fixing that. You don't know where it's broken. You just got to toss it.
And for all shielding, the way you coil the cables, does that affect the how long the shielding will last?
Absolutely.
Over under.
If you wrap it around your arm like this, that's not good.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, over under, one loop inside, one loop outside. So then when you throw it out, it does not turn a spiral wrap into something that's going to twist the connectors on each end.
Yeah.
If you wrap it.
I just saw someone breaking down a booth at NAB, because we were there and I was walking through because we were there for hours afterwards, and there was somebody rolling it over their elbow, and I wanted to step out and say, you can't do that, but I was like, it's not my booth. I wanted to run over and go, stop what you're doing, and I was just like, just stay in your lane, literally stay in your lane, just go back to your booth and worry about your own cable coiling. Go ahead, Marty. Can't hear you.
I fired people for not knowing how to coil a cable correctly.
I taught my kids to do it when they were 8 and 10 years old. Like this is how you roll a cable, and they're like superstars in high school now because they sit there and they just know how to roll it. How to do over under in high school. What everyone else has got kind of a pile of cables,
and not just cable, but rope. Even garden hose.
Well, the funny thing about that is that I really felt like over under. I thought that was something new, like that was something in the AV world. But I explained it to my uncle who grew up on a farm, and he was helping me. I was in Louisville, and he was helping me do a thing, and I showed him, this is how we roll the cables. He goes, just like roping rope, like he immediately knew it, and I was like, this has been like around for 2,000 years. This is not what we're doing is nothing new. Go ahead, Courtney.
So wait, but some other ways that wire can fail and need to, ways need to replace them. they can develop problems at the connectors, but they can also develop problems mid-span in the middle of the wire. And so I've repaired a lot of wires. You can get cable testers that have an LED for each of the pins, and in some cable testers, if when you're moving the wire around, just move it around while each end is connected to the tester. And in some testers, if you lose continuity on any of the pins, it will tell you that. It will latch on or latch off or something, and you'll see that you've lost momentary continuity, and you know that there is a problem there.
Good, Courtney.
Conductors can also get oxidized inside the wire, which is really hard to see, and you actually have to strip the insulation off the wire to see if the conductors, the copper themselves, is oxidized. And once you have oxidized cable, you just throw it away and replace it.
Good, Courtney.
Another quick tip: if you're buying raw cable by the foot from somewhere, usually they'll have a thing that winds it up around a little thing, so the cable is wound spirally, kind of like wrapping it around your elbow and thumb. So when you get new cable, unroll it. Don't just pull it out and try and wrap it up, because it will be permanently have kinks in it, and it'll be hard to train it so it'll lie flat. So unroll it the way that it was wound, and then wrap it up over.
Next question.
Kenny Hampton in Greenville, Illinois. Do TRS patch bays account for and prevent the shorting of connections?
Go ahead, Mickey.
No, they do not, and that's why they're not. If you use TRS patch bays or even standard TT patch bays, which you find in recording studios, make sure that your preamps are powered off, or at least phantom power is powered off before you unplug and plug things in.
Next question.
Robert Linkram in Belmont Shores, California. One of my clients wants an 1/8-inch mini Plug SpeakerPhone recommendation that would plug into an ancient DELL computer using Zoom. The staff that would be using this lacks the desire and capability to use a complex device, so simplicity is better, and he notes no Bluetooth.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Just say no to speakerphones. I would definitely not mention anything that would lead to recommending a speakerphone type device. So I'd say, if perhaps look at the Shure MV7, they have USB interfaces on them. If that's too complicated for them, perhaps an all-in-one USB headset, like something from Logitech or from Polycom, if you want to be on the budget side. But no speakerphones.
Yeah, and I think that if you did do that, it would be a TRR. I think it wouldn't be a TRRS. Is probably what has to happen back and forth, which is going to give you both send and receive. Next question.
Tommy Shantz in St. Paul, Minnesota wonders how the Cat, I guess, Ethernet type snakes work. Is there any amplification, or is everything passive?
Go ahead, Jeff.
So I think what Tommy is talking about is not audio over IP. It's not digital audio. It's not Dante or any of the stage boxes that come with consoles. This is literally using Cat5, usually a shielded version of Cat5 cable, to do 4 twisted pairs of audio. So the breakout boxes on either end go to 4 XLRs, and they share a shield between them, but everything is just passive wire. You're just using the 4 twisted pairs in Ethernet. Sorry, in Cat5. Shouldn't say Ethernet.
Next question.
Roscoe Jones, Madison, Indiana. What cleaners do you recommend for analog audio connections, and what should we avoid using?
Any hard suggestions? Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
Deoxid R5 is the go-to, I think, for cleaning audio connectors, is what I use. It deoxidizes and cleans off dozens of residue.
Good, Mickey.
Yeah, deoxid, and as well as just standard contact cleaner.
Good, Bill.
And what I avoid is anything called rubbing alcohol, because often that's used in massage therapy and things like that, and it'll have oils to keep your skin supple. Those are not good on electrical connections.
But your connections will smell so good.
Oh, they will.
It'll be minty. Yeah. Anyway. Next question.
Next question comes from Leo Mindell in London. For stranded audio cable, do you normally use crimped ferrules? And if so, which is your go-to crimp tool?
Go ahead, Jeff.
No, I don't. Just solder.
Solder is the way to go. Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael wonders, what sonic advantages would a Class A DI have, like the Phoenix Audio's N8? And he's got a link to it.
Has anyone used this? I think we might have been, our last question might have stumped us.
I have to go review what Class A is.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll have to come back to that. Maybe Douglas asked that another Wednesday, and we'll see. We had a great panel today, a great audio panel, great audio experts here. We're really with all of these days. I think the audio panel is probably the most mature as far as a lot of folks that we've been doing the audio day for so long. But with all the days, we have different specialties, and this is a great example of a day when you see these experts in the panel. You know that you can ask a lot of heavy audio questions, and they're going to be able to field them in an expert sort of way. So thank you to the panelists who made today possible. We can't do this without you. And thanks to the incredible team on the back end that is developing the hardware and the software solutions that we need to make this show work, that are managing what we're going to talk about each day, and that are just cutting the actual show, putting this together. This is not your run-of-the-mill Zoom show. So there's a lot of work that goes into it. There's people managing the questions. There's people cutting the show. All these things are happening live. And so we really appreciate everybody's contribution. And thank you to, of course, all the producers who are asking all these questions that keep the first hour going. We had a lot of questions today. I assume we'll have a lot more. Remember that if we send your question back, you can just bring them in the next day and we can talk about it. So if we sent your question back, bring it in tomorrow. Ask lots of questions. The next 2 days are next 4 days really are Q&A. So if this is a great day to be asking questions. So throw those questions in. We traveled. I don't know how far we traveled because I don't have a. Hold on, there we go. I lost my slaw lock traversal here. Let's see here. Hold on. Let's see if we don't know how far we traveled here today. So we traveled a long way. Answered a lot of questions. we don't know. We are missing our slaw lock traversal today. I'm not sure exactly what happened to it, but I'm sure it's floating out there. But thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who makes this show happen. All of us make it happen for all of us. It's kind of a crazy idea. And let's go ahead and jump into After Hours.
Wallach is still out there counting the bananas.
Yeah, he's counting the bananas. Look at this. There's a lot of bananas. I don't know what happened. I just had dinner with Wallach. He's up here, and I think he left yesterday, but I had dinner with him on Monday night. It was great. Yeah, but maybe that's why we don't have any bananas, because we had too much fish. Yeah.
There was a stuff we used to use for patch bays to clean connectors. I'm trying to find
Deoxit?
No. This came as a
paste.
As a paste in a tin.
Yeah. You can also use Magic Eraser from Mr. Clean or whatever it is. Yeah, Mr. Clean.
Oh, those white pads work
yeah,
well.
Yeah.
Interesting.
They have a